Hello dear crypto friends, and welcome to today's video, in which obviously we are going to talk about the Bitcoin price development, where Bitcoin might be headed, and also we want to compare different long-term logarithmic trend channels and estimate what is the more likely one, right? We have, for example, this long-term channel, and we have also this one here. They are both, you will see, quite different, and they will lead to different results long term. But before we start, let us first zoom in and see what's going on. Okay, the weekly candle close, I said last time, is not amazing, not really beautiful, but it is at least not as bad as the one, where is it, from 2018. That was an ugly one. We can all agree that the candle close in 2018 was really ugly. It was really quite low, and therefore the price went lower afterwards. The one in March 2020 was also not too beautiful. It was also below the halfway point, but we still managed to get a rebound. Now we are somewhere in the middle between the March 2020 candle and the March 2018 candle. So in my opinion, both could happen. We still might, if we are super lucky, get a recovery like this one here and continue the rally. But of course, also that is clear only if the stock market continues pumping. If the stock market continues dumping, we can forget this scenario, because if the stock market continues dumping, then it is quite likely that we will get some bounce and probably again revisit the lows if the stock market continues to dump lower. Now, talking about the stock market, the Nasdaq is pumping nicely today, up 3.17% at time of recording, which is already quite nice, of course. And we have said that the Nasdaq is printing a nice hidden bullish divergence with lower lows in the price and higher lows in the RSI. So this is not a bad sign. This is actually a quite good setup, at least for an intermediate bounce. Now, of course, this could be just a dead cat bounce and we continue to go lower. That is clear. I don't want to exclude this scenario, but I think we could be in for a nice bounce before that happens. And if we are lucky and the economic situation drastically improves, as I said in the last videos, there still could be this scenario where we just get a recovery and make new all-time highs, as for example happened here in 2018. We see 2018 was also quite brutal, and then what happened? Well, we just went pumping as if nothing happened. We just recovered and continued pumping. How high is the probability for that? Well, we see that the dollar index is starting to show signs of weakness. We get bearish divergences all over the place, higher highs in the price, lower highs in the RSI, so bearish divergence in the dollar index. The last time this happened, for example, let me look at an example here. We can see a beautiful example here in 2016. Higher highs in the price in the dollar index, lower highs in the RSI. What happened? The dollar started rolling over and going lower. Now, what I always also like to take a look at are, of course, the 2-year government bond yields, because they are super important for the monetary policy of the Fed. And if they rise, then the Fed will continue tightening. If they would start falling, the Fed would start loosening, would become more dovish, and that would mean that the interest rates would not be raised anymore. And we see that there's a bearish divergence in the RSI, which makes us hopeful that hopefully they will start rolling over, and that would of course be nice, because then the dollar index will fall, and then the stock market, Nasdaq, SP 500 and so on will pump. And what will that mean, friends? Well, that will of course mean that Bitcoin, friends, will pump. That is of course very nice. Bitcoin would pump, and there is then still the possibility, I mean, I don't fully exclude it. I think it's just become a bit more unlikely with this brutally low dump that we have seen down to 17,600, down to almost the moving average of 290 weeks, which has been hit in the March 2020 low. I would not entirely rule out such a scenario here, this 4-5 wave move, that we are now entering a wave 5 of this entire cycle here and get to new highs. I won't rule this out entirely. It is still possible. In Bitcoin land, everything is possible. We cannot rule out anything. But I think the probability has become a bit lower. But I will not exclude it for now, and we will just keep track of it and see how this develops. The S&P 500 is also recovering nicely, as we see. But what we also see very nicely in the S&P 500 is that we have a quite nice hidden bullish divergence. We have lower lows in the price and we have a higher low here in the RSI. So this is quite a good sign. If we are lucky, this will be at least an epic bounce, if not by some sheer miracle, just because nobody is expecting it, that we make a new all-time high, just because, like, the contrarian theory. The contrarian theory states that the market is always inclined to do the opposite of what most people believe, because else it would be too easy. If the baker around the corner knows exactly that the S&P 500 will fall and he starts shorting, and your grandmother also knows about it and opens huge shorts, and the friend of a colleague of yours from work also knows about it and opens huge shorts because it's so obvious that the market will fall, then it will be super easy. So the contrarian theory states that it is more likely that something happens which nobody thinks possible, which nobody believes. So I will remain cautiously optimistic that such a scenario is still not entirely ruled out. And that would of course mean that Bitcoin would also pump. Now, if we look at the VIX, this is the volatility for the S&P 500. We see that the volatility of the SPX is actually making a triangle. So this means that we are now in a triangle, and at some point this will break out. But the breakout point is as late this year, early next year. So what does a breakout mean? Well, a breakout means that the volatility spikes, and this is normally only the case when there are huge dumps happening, okay? So for example, we had this triangle here, this very, very nice triangle here last time from late 2017 to early 2020, and then the triangle broke to the upside, and what happened? The COVID crash happened in March 2020. And now something similar is happening. We are in a triangle structure, but of course we don't know when exactly it will break out. Until then, we could still get a nice bounce or a rally of sorts, and then bam, it could start dumping, but probably a bit later than everybody thinks. But this is just a theory, and as we see, the triangle here broke before, so of course we could break earlier. We could already break, I don't know, in September or October or whatever. But it's just interesting to see that the volatility of the S&P 500, so the VIX, is also printing a triangle, which makes us believe that the time for the big dump is not yet entirely here, and that this could drag on for a few more months. And in those months, there could be a nice recovery of the SP 500, of the Nasdaq, and consequently also of Bitcoin and the crypto market. So for that scenario, going back to Bitcoin, we could see something like this. We get a nice bounce now. Everyone is saying, oh, everything is looking good again. We will go to the moon, and then bam, we go down again to 20K. Because remember, even this very optimistic long-term trend channel, we could still be at 20K or shortly below 20K, even as late as early December this year. Talking about long-term channels, this channel is actually a quite optimistic one, believe it or not. Because long term, for example, now let us take the year 2030, right? In the year 2030, the lower bound of this channel is at 755,000, whereas the upper bound is at 4.8 million. Now let me load a second channel here, which is far more pessimistic. I am disabling the first one now, so only the second one. Remember, the lower bound of the previous channel was 700 something thousand, with 4 something million the upper bound. Here the lower bound for 2030 is at 212,000 and the upper bound is at 800 something thousand. So the upper bound, if I just activate the other one, is at the area of the lower bound of the previous channel. So even though these channels were very similar in the beginning, as we can see, they are diverging massively. And it will have to be seen which channel will be the correct one for the long-term price. because what is the difference between these channels is that this here is acknowledging these peaks and says, yes, these were legitimate peaks that hit the resistance line perfectly. But this here was the outlier that should have actually reached 100K or over 100K, but it didn't get a blow off top because, as we know, there are now more institutional investors in Bitcoin, and therefore there has not been a blow off top in this last rally, as has been in every previous rally, as we can see, right? Now, the other logarithmic trend channel, the more conservative one, as you see, here the peaks are outliers, so they go over the upper resistance line, and this last rally now hit exactly the upper resistance line. So the difference is that doesn't take into account so much these previous rally tops here, but places more emphasis on this last one. So of course, accordingly, the long-term behavior is far more conservative. And this long-term channel here actually says that we could even dip as low as 13,700, and we could even be as low as, right now we are at 20,640. In July 2023, we could still dump again to 21,700. So that is a quite brutal channel, but as of now, we don't know which one is the correct one, and they are still both valid, but I have the suspicion that sooner or later, one of those channels will be invalidated, and I strongly fear that this one here, the optimistic one, will be invalidated because it says we can reach values now even as late as this year, in December this year, as high as 250,000. And I find this a bit hard to believe. And this channel is, like, in general super optimistic, so it might happen that at some point I will switch to this more pessimistic long-term channel, because I find it generally a bit more realistic. For example, after the next halving, if we say now worst case scenario, right, we are wobbling around here, bear market, and then after the next halving, the stocks will also recover in some form, because a stock bear market cannot go on for a long time. Normally this lasts 2 or 3 years, and then at some point the stocks will recover. So after the halving we start pumping. It is, I think, much more likely to say that in late 2024 or early 2025 we will reach a value of 250,000, which is the upper line here of this resistance channel. Whereas if you go to the other channel, let me go to the other one, well, it says that we could go up to 600,000 by the same time. Yeah, 600,000, 630,000. I find that a bit brutal to believe, especially since Bitcoin is not rising as fast as I would have thought. Bitcoin's adoption curve is not rising as fast as we have thought, because if we look here, for example, at the Bitcoin unique addresses used, we see that there was a very fast growth until the end of 2017, which I would classify as exponential growth. And now Bitcoin went like a gear slower or something, and it went into a slower exponential growth curve, which of course is still rising, but slower than this first one, which peaked in late 2017. So now we still have less unique Bitcoin addresses than we had in the peak of 2017, which makes me think that Bitcoin adoption is not as fast as we would like, and which makes me think that the probability for this more conservative long-term regression model is unfortunately kind of increasing. So according to this model, if now the miracle would happen and we would now from here on just recover and go into a new rally, we would be in early 2023 at still a respectable 130,000, which is still not something we should be ashamed of. 130,000 is not too bad in my opinion. So this is not entirely ruled out that this will happen. The dollar index looks good because it's printing a bearish divergence. The 2-year government bond yields are printing a bearish divergence. And at the same time, the S&P 500 and the Nasdaq are printing bullish divergences. And the VIX points towards the situation that it will not break out within the next weeks, but the VIX triangle is pointing towards a breakout some point later this year, maybe in 3, 4, 5 months, maybe even as late as early next year as the latest possible date. So it could indeed still be that we get this recovery and make a pump until early 2023. However, I don't know if it will happen, because remember friends, it could also be just a dead cat bounce. If the stock market would correct down again, if this would be just a dead cat bounce by the stock market, we could still go down again brutally, and this could still drag on for a while, and then only in 2024, after the next halving and when the stock market recovers again, because as I said, stock market, bear markets usually last 2 to 3 years, which would be quite in line with what is happening, because this bear market has been going on now since November last year. So this would be about 2.5 years until then. So this could also happen. Just please keep that in mind. We are looking at different theories, at different models, but these are all models. Please keep in mind, friends, these are only models, and a model is only as good as until one day it suddenly doesn't work anymore, because you now have new data points that invalidate your model, and then we need a better model. So I'm thinking that maybe I will give up the optimistic long-term regression model and will instead use this one, the more conservative one, because I think it's better to be more conservative and pleasantly surprised than to be very optimistic and then unpleasantly surprised. Friends, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please like, and spitting all over my microphone. If you did, please like and subscribe, as I would be very happy to welcome you on this small but growing channel. Yeah, I will make daily updates on Bitcoin and the whole crypto market and the stock market, the correlation with all these different assets, so that we understand what coins are likely going to do. I wish you a nice day, friends, and see you in the next update video tomorrow. Bye.